be talking about is really based mostly on the work which has been created during the time that I was in Reading. It's on bilingualism and how bilingualism can change our brain. And this is our team. I would like to thank my lovely supervisors, without whom this project wouldn't have been possible. What I'm going to talk about is something which is also somewhat interesting to me and to the society, which I hope to convince you. Because bilingualism has been suggested to modulate our cognitive abilities, which energize the discussion on possible neurocognitive benefits induced by use of two languages. But many of these findings appear to be inconsistent in related studies. And as a consequence, this has led to questioning the robustness of such results. And I think that to understand how and whether bilingualism changes our mind and brain is crucial, because it's a central central theme to sensitive topics, which the CeLM represents itself. Like, it can inform the discussion on education and migration. It can allow us to include bilingual intervention in a clinical practice, and also demystify bilingualism as something negative, for example, in developmental, as a negative developmental factor in children. If I say inconsistencies, what can we do about them? So previous studies have focused on many ways how they can make the results on effective bilingualism more consistent, like careful group selection according to the bilingual experiences, because not two bilinguals are the same. So which groups let's show the same or similar effects. Investigation and contribution of individual bilingual experiences. For example, some people code switch, some people don't. Some people live in a country where their L2 is a dominant language, some don't. What do these individual differences do to the effects on the brain? And also, it's recommended nowadays to approach bilingual experiences as a continuous variable. So not be asking questions, is somebody bilingual or are they not? But rather asking, to what degree are they bilingual? To what degree are they proficient in the second language? In this talk, I would like to introduce a small other thing which I also think can play a role, and these are the biological principles of experience-based neuroplasticity. And at this point, it may sound overwhelming, but bear with me. I will explain what I mean by that. Overall, I will talk about bilingualism and the brain structure and how it changes our brain structure. So let's zoom in. How do experiences in general change our brain? So brain provides a functional supply to manage our behavior and thoughts, and new experiences can be very demanding and our brain is not used to deal with them. This creates a mismatch between the functional supply of the brain and the new demands. And to manage the new experiences efficiently, the brain has the ability to create new connections and grow. And this process is called experience-based neuroplasticity and has three crucial ingredients. So we need to have high cognitive demand so that the brain thinks, oh, this is so hard that I can't just use my existing resources. The next, it needs time. So if it's over a long period of time, the brain thinks, okay, I'm lazy to change, but it's taken so much time with this new experience that I need to change. It's worth it. And these two things then lead to structural brain changes. And as you can probably infer, bilingualism ticks all the boxes. Use of the two languages triggers an unrelenting need to choose between competing alternatives, which comes with cognitive demands. And the demands are handled by regions related to language processing, language production and comprehension, and also cognitive control. Bilingualism is a long-standing experience, often a lifelong experience. So it's requires a lot of time. So not surprisingly, bilingualism is well established as an experience which can prompt the brain to make new connections and grow. But the brain cannot grow forever. Not only that there are some obvious physical limitations, such as we cannot have larger brain than our skulls. Also, if you think what is a nature's solution to adaptability and increasing efficiency, it's not a never-ending growth. If you think about the Darwinian principle, the most suitable individuals are selected, whereas the other individuals do not make the cut. So how the brain grows and changes, these principles of neuroplasticity resemble an auditioning. If you were about to make a Hollywood movie and were looking for the best leading actress, you would invite many candidates for your auditioning. This will increase the chance that among the many candidates, that there is a perfect candidate for the role. And that's something what brain does, inviting many connections and hoping that among the many connections, there is going to be the perfect one. At the moment that when you find the best actress, you will send the other people home because you don't need them. And it's something which brain might be doing as well. First, making many new connections to have a big pool to choose from. Once identifying the best connections, the superfluous connections are cut and keeping the most efficient one. So this principle in the context of bilingualism has been described in a recent model, the dynamic restructuring model. And you are very lucky that you are at the university where the creator of this model is located, the Christos Pletsikas. This theoretical model has two key principles, which are important to decide how to approach brain changes induced by bilingualism. So the first principle is that the quality and quantity of bilingual experiences governs the brain changes. So to reveal the effects of bilingualism on the brain, it is necessary to assess bilingual experiences as a continuous variable. The structural brain changes are expected to be dynamic. As I told you about the auditioning, you would expect first a lot of connections and larger brains, and at the end, when we become more efficient, you would expect smaller amount of connections and smaller brain. So to reveal the dynamic changes in the brain, it is necessary to use a method which can model nonlinear effects of experiences on the brain. And I will illustrate it also in this picture. So when we start learning, here you can see how the behavior and, for example, language proficiency in bilinguals is related to brain changes according to this model. When we start learning a new language, behavioral performance continuously increases until we reach the peak of efficiency and it stabilizes. This is also called the CeLM effect. During the demanding experiences like bilingualism, brain tries at the beginning to meet the new demands and grows. As a consequence, also the gray matter, the part of the brain which we measure, increases. Once the peak efficiency is reached, the brain identifies the most important neural connections and keeps them and sends the other connections home. So this is also in the picture what we expect, and it's also explained why it's necessary to look at the nonlinear effects, because as you see, the trajectory is not just one straight line. So in this talk and during my PhD, I have conducted several studies, and I will talk about two of them, where we looked at bilingualism through the lens of experience-based neuroplasticity to investigate how bilingualism changes our brain. And we explored the combined bilingual experiences, and then we also looked at bilingual experiences of interpreters and translators. To address these objectives, we collected data from 114 Czech native speakers who spoke English at a high level of proficiency. They're living in the Czech Republic. And there are an additional inclusion criteria to make sure that our sample is consistent. And in the first study, we used this sample to look at the bilingual experiences and their dynamic effects on the regional brain volumes in the middle of the brain. And these areas, which you can see here in color, are important for keeping our languages separate, keeping our attention on, are important for switching. So if you think about it, these areas are also important for bilingualism. And we know this for a fact from studies which show that these areas are active in the brain when we try to speak more than one language. So how do bilingual experiences influence structure of these brain regions? And the key dependent variable, the key predictor in this study are the composite scores of bilingual experiences, the so-called language and social background questionnaire. And it's a questionnaire which puts together the proportional of frequency of use of L1, L2, use in various contexts, speaking about various topics, code switching frequency, and language proficiency. And the higher the scores, the higher scores indicate increased bilingual engagement, increased balance in use of and switching between the two languages. In the data analysis, we use generalized additive mix models, which is a statistical model which can model nonlinear relationships. And we looked how the bilingual experiences change the brain volumes of these colorful structures. So here are the results. I will lead you through this. So you see plots which feature the brain volumes on the y-axis and the bilingual experiences on the x-axis. And we also controlled for age on the z-axis. And you can see that for coded, which is a structure important for switching between languages and keeping in mind which language sets we are going to use in a conversation, we see that with increasing bilingual experience, the structure grows, the gray matter of the structure grows, up until the point when the bilinguals become very efficient in using two languages, at least according to their experiences, and then the structure shrinks again. So this nicely shows the expected results on that bilingualism can be a dynamic and it can cause growth and a decrease of brain volumes. In accumbens, which is a structure related to coded, also important for bilingualism and motivation, we see similar pattern. The more balanced bilinguals, so the more engaged bilinguals we see, the larger accumbens, up until to the point when the structure plateaus. For other two structures, putamen, which is important for articulation, and thalamus, which is important for attention, we see that with growing bilingual experiences, these structure growth. And we could interpret these findings as that bilinguals in our group did not reach the peak efficiency in the tasks which are subserved by these structures, maybe because they were living still in the Czech Republic and not in an immersive setting. This is one possible interpretation. In the second study, we looked at the brain changes in bilingual professionals, the interpreters and translators, who need to use their two languages under immense time pressure and very intensely. So we looked at the bilingual experiences in these three groups, interpreters, translators, and normal bilinguals, and how they influence the volumes of the same structures as in the first study. But we focused here mainly on putamen and coded. And putamen, I've already said, is for articulatory control and simultaneity. So we thought this might be very important structure for interpreters. And coded is important for all bilinguals, as in studies on very different bilingual populations, we see changes, we see this structure engaged. So how do bilingual experiences in three groups influence the structure of coded and putamen? Here we are looking at graphs with 3 columns for each of the investigated groups: interpreters, translators, and bilinguals. And the 2 rows for the volumetric trajectories of Codet and Puteyman. On the y-axis are the volumes of the structure, and on the x-axis, the bilingual experiences. And as you can see, the volumes renormalize, meaning grow and decrease, clearly only in interpreters. This confirms that the intensity of bilingual experiences matters and not only the quantity, because it might be that interpreters are using the 2 languages so intensely that the brain has enough opportunity to identify the most important connections and send the other connections home to cut them. In the other groups, we see more continuous increase of these structures. So I would like to illustrate how the quality of bilingual experiences matter on this example from the interpreters and translators. So you can see in the interpreters, and translators differ because interpreters need to deal with simultaneity in their jobs, and they also need to switch rapidly between pronunciation of 2 languages. Translators, on the other hand, do not need to engage in this kind of activities that much. And these processes are subserved by Puteyman. Here you can see that Puteyman renormalizes in interpreters, but not in translators. But if you look at the bilingual experiences, the 2 groups have very similar amount of bilingual experiences. So it's the way how the groups use the language and not the amount of the experience, which can trigger different results. In this case, likely a renormalization of the Puteyman structure in a group which really needs this structure on a daily basis. So this brings me to a discussion and to wrap up this part of my talk. So first and foremost, I hope to have convinced you that bilingualism is a dynamic, multifaceted experience, and as such it induces dynamic changes in behavior, but we have seen how that induces changes in the brain. And we observed nonlinear changes in the brain. And I think that maybe if other studies did the same, or the future studies will do the same, we might explain part of the variability in results in the existing studies on brain changes in bilinguals. I hope to have showed you also that specific bilingual behaviors train cognition in different ways and then induce the changes in the brain regions linked to that type of behavior. Think about the different trajectory of the Puteyman, which is differently utilized in interpreters and in translators. So I think that future studies should make a mental space for the possibility that the world around us is not linear, but it can be more complicated, maybe more difficult to explain, but more adequate. And I think it's also important to treat bilingual experiences as a continuous variable, because imagine that we were just comparing bilinguals and monolinguals, we wouldn't be able to model the amount of what's the effect of the amount of bilingual experiences on the structure. So I think it's important to keep this in mind as well. And I think it's also good to combine cross-sectional and continuous approach. If you think about the first study, it was just a continuous approach where we didn't compare the groups together, but some interesting additional effects and observation might emerge if you look also what is happening on the group level, especially at this point when we still know so little about what about being bilingual changes our brain and behavior. So at the end of the scientific part, I just wanted to say to you what you might be asking yourself, how can we use this knowledge? What is it good for to know how bilingualism changes our brain? And it's something which I'm trying to do now at the University of Amsterdam. We are taking this knowledge and trying to look whether we can use bilingualism as a protective factor against Alzheimer's disease. Because once we know what bilingualism does to our brain, we are maybe paving a way to using bilingualism as a non-pharmacological intervention. you know, all this research wouldn't have been possible without all my lovely colleagues from the University of Reading and elsewhere, and thanks to the financial contribution of European Union Czech Bioimaging and Fulbright. And this concludes the scientific empirical part of my talk. And it was a tale of bilingual experiences. So let me end with typical tale thing. And thus the bilingual experiences modulated brain and mind happily ever after. I don't know whether it's useful to stop here and then maybe answer some questions and then go to the tips for the the early career researchers.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Thank you. That was fascinating. Does anybody have any questions? I mean, I have one, maybe to start. I just thought oh, Anna has one. Shall I go first? Is that all right, Anna? I'll be quick. I just thought it was really fascinating, this difference between interpreters and translators. And I was just interested in, the job of an interpreter, it is really nothing like the normal experience of being bilingual. I mean, in a way, it's a sort of special case of kind of doing this extremely difficult task that requires you to essentially, focus your attention on two very different things simultaneously. And you sort of equated that with, well, did you equate that with sort of, really high level bilingualism? But I was kind of thinking, is it just something quite different? I mean, interpreters that I know don't necessarily, speak those languages really fluently. What they're brilliant at is listening, and speaking and switching between languages in that way, which to me seems really quite different from being a very, very fluent bilingual who can easily switch between languages. I don't know, it's not really a question there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's a absolutely righteous and great point. I think you're right that the experience the interpreters have in terms of how they're dealing with two languages is different. In what I think it might help, it's intuitively so. What we try to do is we use the same measure of bilingual experiences, and maybe also because of that, we had some interpreters who didn't score that high in terms of the balance of the use of the two languages. So there was still nice variability, and we compared these measures. So we looked at this as the predictor. And what you say is basically what the results show. We saw different trajectories. Why is this important? It shows us in case of interpreters, there might be something specific about them, yet many studies just are, you give a questionnaire and that's absolutely fine, but not realizing that there might be some group differences you're not tapping into. So what I think is a great point of view, and also, we should be keeping in mind that there might be some specific we didn't tap into. So, and this is an empirical confirmation of that to my feeling. They are bilinguals. They could have been included in many other groups. I don't know. We don't usually ask people, do every now and then translate something, and some people do. Is it something we should be doing?
Yeah. Thank you. There's a question from Anna.
Sorry, I'm trying to make my camera and mic work. I wonder whether we want to give space to PhD students to ask questions first. I don't mind waiting. Oh, I cannot. You cannot hear me yet?
No, I think Holly's muted.
Yeah. Sorry. No, ask your question, Anna, and then I can see there are two more questions, and then we'll answer those.
Okay, so mine was to do, thank you, Michael, first of all. Mine was to do with aging. I know you kind of touched upon it towards the end of your presentation, but you had those very elegant graphs showing how age may contribute to the change in grey matter. And this reminded me of something I'm not very familiar with, this kind of critical window where people would think that multilingualism would work best or better. Do you have any comments on that? I think it may be related to another question that is in the chat right now.
Yeah, that's a interesting question. So, you know, I'm not doing research on identifying when it's the best myself now, but colleagues from University of Groningen did an enormous study with thousands of participants on the cognitive level, trying to look whether language learning in elderly can make some cognitive effects, and they came with results that it can. So maybe there is a better way, a better time than to learn languages. But what's hopeful to me is to see, even though maybe it's less effective later, it still can trigger measurable effects. And I think it's a wonderful question, and we should focus on this.
Right. So there is hope.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. So there's a question from Amal. Yeah, it is a bit related, but I'll ask it. Do you think that children and adults face the same difficulties in learning a second language in relation to brain plasticity?
I think so. I think it's safe to say no. I don't know what the exact differences are, but the most thing which makes me believe that there is a difference in terms of how the brain deals it. When we are young children, we have so many connections in our brain as much as we won't ever have in our life. So this purely says we have much more resources which we can test for being efficient, or differently test for being efficient. So there is a difference in terms of how the brain deals with it, but I wouldn't like to be concrete.
Okay, thank you. And then a question from Lynn, who says, is there any research when it comes to people who speak more than 2 languages, and does that affect the brain differently?
Mm-hmm. There is not much research. I know that Leena Fedorenko have published yesterday or something on multilinguals, but there is going to be research also from Christos's lab, from our colleague Jaen Yi, who has done her PhD at in Malaysia. So stay tuned. She looked at bilinguals, trilinguals, quadrilinguals, I think even pentalinguals. Wow. So let's stay tuned. It's going to be exciting.
Oh, wow. And then one more from Amal. What do you think about the hypothesis provided by Chomsky, critical period, which is the brain loses its plasticity at age 14? I think that was actually somebody else. But yes, the critical period. Janine's got a thumbs down. What do you think about the critical period hypothesis?
So I would like to maybe just limit it to not critical period hypothesis for language, but you know, in neuroplasticity, it's right that we are using gradually our plasticity as we age, and I think it's safe to say. I personally think that there is that we can still learn languages even if we are older.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Okay, do you think we should, Aniqa, should we move on now? I guess we're halfway through.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting, and oh my goodness, I feel like I've learned so much as well. But Michal, if you'd like to move on to the ECR part of this talk, where you'll be talking about, you know, the wider PhD experience, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Yes, I will. I think now it should be again focus on the presentation.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. So it's the end, but it's actually the beginning, so bear with me. Oh yes, so this is about in this talk. First, thank you so much for interesting questions, and if you have any more questions to the research, please email me or write me on Twitter or where you can find me. But now, you know, I really had amazing time at the University of Reading, and it was such a great part of my life, but it was also very stressful. And it's also stressful because you need to deliver, and then obviously all your academic PhD life is going to the last point when you need to pass the viva and write the PhD thesis, and it's hard. So be kind to yourself, because I think everybody experiences this hard. So you know, Gandalf is a cool guy, but I wouldn't trust him that you shall not pass, because I really think that you can do this. And I thought maybe it's, you know, just to make sure that we are on the same page, just to say, how does a viva look like? And maybe it's not going to be true, but at least it's, you know, was true to me. So it was how viva looked like to me. So basically you have, or I had two examiners, one internal and external, who read thoroughly my PhD thesis, and then I needed to meet with them. And in first 10 minutes, they asked me to present what the thesis is about. You know, they read it, so you don't need to go really deep, or they should read it, and I really hope they do. So you don't need to go really deep into anything. You can be brief. And you can use a PowerPoint presentation, which I would actually recommend. I've heard that not everybody is doing it, but I felt, you know, in the stress itself, it feels like you have at least some structure to hang on to. And it's really more psychological help that you think, okay, I can't control so many things, but I can at least control these 10 minutes. And it helped me a lot, just psychologically, to learn it almost by heart, what I wanted to say in these 10 minutes. And it's such a small part of the viva, but it gets you going. And if this goes well, I personally felt so much better already after the first 10 minutes elapsed. And in theory, you know, then the assessor is going to ask you unlimited amount of questions. And I've heard horrifying stories about hours of viva, but these were rare, and maybe it was just anecdotal, or maybe it was, you know, just some urban legend. Usually what I took from conversations with my peers, the viva takes around like 6 to 90 minutes or 2 hours. So it's not that bad. And then you leave the room and the examiners decide your results. So this is in a nutshell what it looked like. It's nice to think about this, but it's what helped me a lot to go through the experience of the viva, and it's something which I focus in this part of the talk, was to try to anticipate the questions. So, you know, anticipate the questions what they can ask almost anything. And there are some general questions which you can almost count on that one of them is going to be asked. And it's something which, you know, the lists are going on and you can find it on the internet. But it's nice to get prepared for these. So what is the original contribution of your thesis to the field? You should be able to say what's your main research questions you are hoping to address. And maybe, you know, what is nice is trying to do this 3 minutes pitch, and not only for the viva, but for the PhD experience as well. For networking, it's really nice if you have a pitch of 3 minutes, where if you're meeting somebody at a conference, you can just quickly share, you know, this is what I'm doing. What are the strengths and weaknesses of your thesis? And I will come back to that a little bit in another slide. If you could start the thesis again, what would you do differently? That's really a question which many of my peers told me that they have been asked. If funding was no object, if you had unlimited amount of money, how do you follow on from this project? And it's something, because, you know, what the assessors also try to feel to my knowledge is, are you an independent researcher who's moving the field forward, and are you able to come with your own ideas and, you know, develop your line of research? So having somewhat a playful question about unlimited funding is actually, you know, in this is wrapped the idea, show me that you know what you're doing and how it fits in the broader picture and what you would like to do in the future. Maybe also identifying what are the problems of the field. And that, you know, is basically linked to what are the plans for the future. So, you know, these are a little bit general questions. And if you are thinking about more content-related questions you can expect during your viva, I would advise you to present your work at everywhere where it's possible. So conferences, club meetings, try to, you know, invite yourself to meetings of other groups, because you know, sometimes when we are doing our research, and probably you experience this as well, you get this tunnel vision, and it's so refreshing to just hear the ideas of others, and they are much more in state to look objectively at your work. So the more you present at conferences, the more ideas you can get of what people can be asking also during your viva. Also, try to publish your work as a preprint, which doesn't require you to pass the review, peer review. So that's a nice way, just on a server, and you can, if you type preprint publishing on the Google, you will find it. Just try to find a venue where you can publish the first version of your manuscript. And what happened to me, we did almost all our papers in the preprint version before submitting them. I got many times nice questions from people who are interested in this work, and helping me shaping, you know, the formulations or the way how I approach it in the research. So you will just get many ideas on your work, which can help you also, again, to identify what people in your viva committee can be asking about. And the other thing is, it will force you to write it. So, you know, if you give yourself the goal to write a preprint and send it somewhere, it will save you time, because you basically can use this as a chapter for your PhD later. And maybe, you know, sometimes, at least myself, have a tendency to leave everything at the last moment. This might be a way how you can, which can force you to write one of the chapters earlier and not having everything to do at the last moment. And also try to publish your work, but it's not oftentimes that easy as it's said. What's nice about this, it can also help you identify what you know are the weaknesses, and you can focus on them, because you can bet that the examiners will be trying to find the weaknesses of your work in a good way to help you further. But yeah, it can be stressful, so you can get prepared. What helped me as well in preparing for the viva, and actually already in the process of writing the PhD, was knowing my examiners. I mean, their job is not forcing you to, you know, feel, or not making you feel bad, but it can feel like it. So if you think about them, what their work is, it makes them more approachable, and it can also help you identify what they can be asking about during their viva. So do you know their work? Do you know the work of your examiners? Have you heard their questions at conferences? Because some people, you know, are asking, usually, and it's very logical, they are asking things which are very related to what we find interesting, and we tend to ask these questions at several places because it's something which occupies our mind. So if you've heard your examiner at a conference asking questions, it gives you an idea which direction they might be going during your viva. How does your work relate to their work? And that's something which is definitely, you know, if they are experts in their field, there's a huge chance, because they have been invited to as experts to evaluate your work, that you should know how your work relates to the outer field, and their work is part of this. What I found also very nice piece of advice, if you know your examiners before you submit the thesis, and it's usually the case, try to cite their work, because, I mean, try to mention their work already in your thesis, because it can help you. It's usually very logical, and sometimes we have several options of who we will cite, especially if it goes about some studies which are more generally approached, you know, like some review studies and such. Then why not to choose the review study from a lab of some of your examiners. It will already help you to make yourself familiar with their work, get prepared for the viva. So this I found actually a nice way how, you know, it can make you already think how your work relates to the outer field and also to the work of your examiners. Basically, what all this I think the examiners should do and are doing is prove you are an independent thinker who can think out of the box. And that's actually the same if you are just going to show that you're familiar with their work. You're just basically showing you can think out of the box of your thesis and also relate it to other pieces of work. And I have some general tips. Have a good sleep for the viva. Do not stress on the day when the viva is happening, but maybe this works only for me. I actually just force myself not to do anything with the thesis on the day of the viva, just to being, you know, you're overthinking things. But it's maybe not work for everybody, so know yourself. If you're not sure what's the question about during the viva itself, reformulate the question and check with the assessor whether you got it right. Admit your mistakes and try to cast it into future research. Oh, okay, maybe you're right. You know, this is a great point. That's something which a future research should be focusing on. Write down long questions and answer their parts. Sometimes the questions they can ask are very long, and it helps you to organize your thoughts if you try to write the question and already prepare the parts while they are asking the rest of the very long question. And if you need it, ask for extra time to think. So I did this, and it also gives you a little bit of feeling that you have agency about what's happening there. Just saying, okay, you know, I've never thought about it. Just give me a minute. I would like to think about it a little bit deeper, and be sure. Yeah, I mean, they are going to give you the time, and it's nicer to just take, you know, rather than saying something abrupt, which isn't relevant. I think they will appreciate that you took the time and really answer their question. And also it's possible, and I think it's fine, at least I experienced it, my assessors felt fine with it, if I didn't know the answer, because we don't know answer for everything, but you can offer a different perspective. Oh, okay, I don't know answer to your question, but it makes me think about a study which I read, which had interesting similar approach. Then you show that you know your work, and you can just admit that you didn't know answer for that question. Maybe something reassuring, and that's a few slides. So I looked at what are the odds, you know, how afraid should you really be statistically seen that you're not going to pass the viva. So here I think it's a census from 2010 or something. So it's a little bit older, but I think the proportions might still be right. So just 4% of PhD students fail their viva, and 96%, so overwhelming majority, is just fine. From these 96, 5% gets no amendments. The most people get minor corrections, and pretty small amount of the people gets major revision. So I think it's also reassuring. And also from, you know, the people who failed the viva, there are 97% still get an MPhil, which is also nice. You know, it's like you still get something for your hard work. So I think that, you know, the numbers can be reassuring for some. It works like this for me. And I would like to, you know, tell you that it's going to be fine. And, you know, it's actually pretty great once you get there. So enjoy it as well. And I promise you will be thinking, even at the times when you felt most hopeless, back with a smile and thinking what a journey it has been. And you will be proud of yourself. And you will just take so much knowledge from this very specific and hard journey. So I think you will love it once it's over.
Thank you so much. I love your photo. that just captures it so wonderfully. Thank you so much, Michal. Loads of really interesting tips and guidance that you've managed to give us within that session. I'm just going to open the floor for whether any of the ECRs in the audience have any questions. I can see people typing, probably rapidly typing away, whatever they'd like to ask. I guess just to start things off, I wanted to ask you more personally, in terms of whenever you got your date for your viva, between when you submitted and then when you had your viva date, how much time did you dedicate to kind of preparing, working towards that?
I had very efficient examiners. I think it's also individual, but I think it was like within 4 or 5 weeks after I submitted, I got the first date, and there was also their kindness because I wanted to, you know, I was moving to the States, so they were very kind with this. But so it was like 5 weeks, but I took, after submitting, I think 2 weeks off. And then I think it's something which everybody should do, because it helped me also to look with much clearer eyes at the thesis. What was also nice to do at the time was just asking people, can I, you know, with my supervisor, we did a mock viva, that was great. And with my peers, PhD students, they also try to ask these general questions. So you can ask the most mock viva also by people who didn't read your work. I need to say that it wasn't that I spent really the whole time like preparing. I think it's maybe also just make sure, be systematic. So if you really think these are all the questions I could possibly think of, somebody has asked me, then you're fine. And just remind yourself maybe a week before that. But overstressing, I don't think it's going to do a good job.
I think that's very, very wise. Very, very wise. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how in 5 weeks that sounds terrifying, but it seems like it worked really well for you, and I'm glad that that was the case. So Xiaobo says, thank you so much, super useful. He asks, can you please talk about your data analysis experience after collecting the data? Do you have any suggestions about this process?
So I was lucky that I had support of my supervisor who used similar method, but there was, you know, the nonlinear modeling. There was something which I think partly I needed to do mostly myself. What's nice about this, don't be afraid to ask people elsewhere. You know, people are usually very kind and are okay with you dropping a line. And in data analysis, what's great, depending on what program you used, is also don't be afraid to ask for the scripts. It's not usually something people would recommend themselves, but they also don't mind. That's my experience. So if you read a paper which uses roughly the same analysis you would like to use, you can just ask. And, you know, in Dutch, they say a no is something you have, a yes is something you can get. So you have nothing to lose, and you can always get a yes for the script.
I love that. Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's a very profound saying. If there are any other questions from anyone in the audience, whether you want to type, or if you want to come on to turn your mic on and ask directly, that's also great. I can see there's other students who are typing, so I'll just give them a moment to do so. But wow, that's amazing. How did you celebrate, Michal?
Sorry?
Oh, actually, sorry, I won't ask that because Emily's just asked a question, so we'll do that. Emily asked, said, thank you for a great talk. So she said, I just wondered how much you referred to your thesis during the viva, because she's seen photos of theses with lots of like post-it notes and all sorts, etc. And also how much the examiners asked about the literature versus your own work.
Mm-hmm. So in my experience, it was not that I had almost, you know, very little I needed to say on the page 127. You can see what was also nice in the like making the small presentation, that you already put, for example, the biggest graphs, the most important graphs. in the presentation. And at the moment, it's something which happened twice during my viva, that you can say, oh, you know, let me share it just very quickly. So this is what you're talking about. We can see it here. So that's helpful, maybe the visuals to have it ready. So in my case, to the second part of the question, they were asking mostly about my work, the first part, and then the not that much about the. So I didn't have a feeling that they expect very much that I have a detailed knowledge, like knowing how many participants this study had, another study than mine. But what they did ask were questions which asked me to demonstrate that I can really understand what is the take-home message from all these studies and how it connects together. So maybe like trying to have some mental flowchart of an idea how studies group from your side, from your references, how they group together in terms of topics, and then having like one example of an idea of a framework, theoretical framework ready. As I think it looks good if you say, you know, this is like in this paper, that you are able to refer to concrete papers, but it wasn't something I felt they are expecting from me, rather the idea, understanding the idea.
So Emily just responded saying that's really, really helpful. Thank you. And just making a comment that it's not a test of your knowledge of all previous published papers then, which is reassuring.
Yeah.
Okay,
Fantastic.
I think we should probably wrap up now. I just, can I say, as a sort of, you know, from the other side, as an examiner, I think your advice is absolutely brilliant. I mean, those sample questions you had are exactly the kinds of questions that are asked in almost every viva. And I love your advice to essentially stalk your examiner at conferences to see what's currently, you know, the thing that they're really interested in, because, you know, we're all human, aren't we? And we all ask about the things that we're interested in at that moment, irrespective of what thesis we're examining. So really brilliant advice, really brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful talk, both parts. And hopefully it will be the first of many ECR talks. So thank you, Aniqa and Debra, for organising as well. So yeah, I think that's all for now. So thanks everyone for coming. Thanks for all your fantastic questions. I think you recorded the session, did you, Aniqa?
I did, yes. That's right.
Should we start recording now? And so if it's okay with you, Michal, we will put that on our YouTube channel, so that if people weren't able to come, they can watch it at their leisure.
That's fine. Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Oh, thank you. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a good afternoon or evening or morning, depending where you are. And yeah, thanks again, Michal. Really, really great.
Bye.
Okay.